art of borrowing, Shakespeare's use of sources, AI, and the question of copying. Shakespeare's works are often regarded as the pinnacle of literary achievement, but what happens when we examine his sources more closely? Were his plays truly original, or did he simply borrow, or even copy, from those who came before him? In this video, we'll explore how Shakespeare used existing material, the cultural context of literary borrowing, and the distinction between inspiration and direct copying. Shakespeare's use of existing sources. Shakespeare didn't create his stories entirely from scratch. Many of his famous plays, like Hamlet, Macbeth, and Romeo and Juliet, were based on existing works. For example, Macbeth is drawn from Raphael Holinshed's Chronicles of England, and Hamlet has roots in Scandinavian folklore. Similarly, Romeo and Juliet was inspired by a 16th century Italian novella by Arthur Brooke. Shakespeare took these pre-existing stories and added his own voice, giving them new layers of meaning. While the foundations of his plays may have been borrowed, the transformation he achieved made his work stand out. The line between inspiration and copying. A key discussion surrounding Shakespeare's work is whether he copied his sources. The answer depends on how we define copying. While Shakespeare certainly adapted plots, characters, and ideas, he didn't simply replicate them. Instead, he reimagined them, adding his own perspective, depth, and insights into human nature. In Renaissance England, borrowing from existing sources wasn't seen as plagiarism. Writers often took inspiration from mythology, history, and classical literature. Shakespeare's borrowing fit within the practices of his peers, such as Christopher Marlowe and Edmund Spenser. The Renaissance tradition of literary borrowing. In the 16th and 17th centuries, the concept of intellectual property was different from today. Authors didn't necessarily claim originality the way we do now. Instead, they participated in a shared cultural conversation. For Shakespeare, borrowing wasn't an act of dishonesty, but a way to engage with a literary tradition that spanned centuries. Writers were expected to adapt and transform stories. What made Shakespeare's work exceptional was his ability to give those stories new life. Shakespeare's transformation of his sources. Shakespeare didn't just borrow ideas, he reshaped them. A great example is King Lear, which is based on the ancient myth of King Lear. While the story of a king and his daughters already existed, Shakespeare transformed it into a profound exploration of human nature, suffering, and madness that transcends the original myth. Similarly, Julius Caesar isn't just a retelling of historical events. It becomes a study of power, betrayal, and moral ambiguity. Shakespeare's genius lies in how he transformed these borrowed stories, making them his own through deep character exploration and rich themes. Reimagining, not copying. The distinction between inspiration and copying is important. Shakespeare didn't simply regurgitate material. He infused it with complexity and insight into human nature. His ability to take familiar plots and reframe them with emotional depth and psychological complexity is what made his works groundbreaking. Borrowing as a creative act. Shakespeare's use of sources should not diminish his reputation as one of the greatest writers in history. Instead, it should be celebrated as a testament to his creativity and mastery. In an era where literary borrowing was common, Shakespeare stood out because he could breathe new life into the stories he borrowed, making them resonate with audiences for centuries to come. By understanding literary borrowing in Shakespeare's time, we can better appreciate his work not only as a writer, but as a masterful adapter of stories. His genius lies in how he took what already existed and turned it into something far greater than anyone could have imagined. AI-generated content, the new age of borrowing and adaptation. In today's age of artificial intelligence, the debate about literary borrowing becomes even more complex. AI tools like GPT can generate content that seems original, but how much of it is truly new? Just as Shakespeare borrowed from historical records, myths, and literature, writers today are borrowing from AI-generated content. But is this the same type of borrowing Shakespeare engaged in? AI-generated content is the result of algorithms trained on vast amounts of existing data, including works from many authors and ideas. In a way, AI mimics Shakespeare's process of borrowing ideas and crafting something new, but with a modern twist. Writers can use AI-generated material as a foundation, much like Shakespeare, but they still inject their own voice, vision, and creativity into the final product. However, the question remains, can AI produce truly original content? AI lacks the human experiences, emotions, and insights that contribute to true artistic creation. Yet, it can serve as a tool for writers, offering inspiration, suggestions, or drafts. In this sense, AI acts as both a collaborator and a tool for adaptation, much like how Shakespeare adapted his sources to fit his vision. In the end, whether it's Shakespeare borrowing from historical texts or contemporary writers using AI as a creative tool, both are part of a long tradition of literary innovation. The key difference today is that while AI may lack the depth of human experience, it can still serve as a springboard for new ideas, challenging writers to explore new possibilities and reshape what came before them. As with Shakespeare, borrowing from human authors, historical works, or even AI doesn't diminish the writer's creative power. It's how they take what has come before and adapt it into something personal, something uniquely theirs, that defines originality. If Shakespeare and AI ever met, he'd probably name his AI Bardzilla, a playful nod to both his legacy and the new creative forces at play.